Feels live at the White House. Man, it's been a really interesting week geopolitically. A lot going on. Glenn Ignazio joins us, someone who we have talked to so often about the war in Ukraine, and been looking forward to having a conversation the last couple of days, Glenn, after everything that's gone on, including the comments today and the president's shift on things earlier in the week in New York. Now Turkey comes in, says stop buying Russian oil, thinks suddenly, apparently, that Ukraine can win the war. Where are we in all this?
Yeah, it is very complex. It's good to see you again, Connell. Well, let's take a look at first Turkey. So, of course, there was political aspects about the F-35s, but there's also some technical aspects. Turkey has always been sort of sitting on both sides, and it's one of those things that the U.S. is looking at it, are you friend or your foe? And I hate to put it that way, but the reason for it is that the F-35 being a stealth aircraft, they bought the Russian S-400 missile systems. And what they can do is they can use those systems and tune it and research it to find out how do you detect F-35. That is not a good thing for anybody to have. And that was one of the concerns technically and from a national security standpoint that put things on hold. Now, if we transition to Ukraine, as far as what he was doing and changing his perspective, I get it from a policy standpoint, but as we've talked militarily as for how the operation goes, it's very difficult to actually get that land back. Not from weapons. Now, each other can destroy each other to all end, but it still has to be the occupation. And as we said, the troops in Ukraine are the difficulty to get that land back. And so unless something changes with the troop manning within Ukraine, that's the difficulty of getting that territory back. And I think that's one of the things we've been looking at for a while.
So when people, when Keith Kellogg says you can kick Russia's rear end, or the president says they can win the war and push the belt back, what Joe Khalil said there about the president's comments on the tablet, I have them pretty much outlined, is what sort of, I think, what President Trump is referring to when he says that Russia's only managed to take 1% of Ukraine's territory in the past 20 months. This coming from the Institute for the Study of War, burning through half of their liquid sovereign wealth fund and about 1 million Russian casualties from the war. It brings us to the map that you and I have talked about. So that's why I was looking forward to talking to you, Glenn, because when we, circle this land, I know you've been, relatively adamant about it, that it's going to be tough to push those borders back. So what do you think is going on here with the president? Is some sort of a negotiating tactic, or he really believes that Ukraine can get its land back?
I think maybe it's a combination of both, but I do see more on the negotiation. I know that actually Secretary Rubio met with Lavrov yesterday after the UN. It wasn't really covered that much, but it'd be interesting about what those conversations were about. Now, with the sanctions and everything and hurting Russia's economy significantly, of course, that takes a little bit of time, but we do see prices, the economy in Russia really hurting that way. And maybe that is some punishment that Putin will take to try to pull something out of Ukraine. But I think he would more or less stop the war, because he always says we're going to keep the territory. So again, to get that territory back, it'd be a hard negotiation for Russia to give that up because they've already gained it. So it'd have to be militarily. And I don't see this war or anything changing or ending militarily. And again, they'd have to push Russia back, and Ukraine and Russia have been at a stalemate. So again, those lines are very concerning. I think it would have to be a swap, but it's that situation that we face right now.
You couldn't do it with just, our weapons and NATO weapons and the Ukrainian army. Is that what you mean by militarily? We couldn't give them enough weapons to do it?
Yeah, I mean, given the weapons now, it's going to be a lot of destruction and killing on each side, and Putin always pushes those people and more troops in. But again, you'd have to have that force from Ukraine pushing that border out, or at least that line of troops out of Ukraine. And that's where it has to be the human capital to do that. And how do you do that? There's been talk about, professional military corporations, basically mercenaries, to actually hire privately into Ukraine. That's a whole dynamic we could get into, very long story there. But at the same time, it's got to be that human capital that pushes it out. So that's where I think we're at, unless something changes, and that's unfortunately the way it stands.
I know it's speculative, but as a final point, why do you think Trump said what he said this week? Why do you think the shift happened, or the change in tone took place?
Well, I think he's, fed up with the killing. If you look at it personally, again, we saw the dynamics, especially the ego as it is between Putin and Trump, is that Putin has completely, upset him greatly. He's angered him, and that he's showing that he's 100% Ukraine, or at least leaning that way, which should put Putin in question, or at least make him a little nervous, because he knows how Trump operates. So I think it's a lot of political. I think that's also, he would love this just to end. And maybe that's one of the tactics to say, hey, you don't know what we're going to do to back Ukraine. A lot of in play about this, but again, I think it's one of those things of saying, hey, Putin, I'm not quite on your side anymore because you've been lying to me, and I'm backing these guys, Ukraine, to get you the heck out of that country.
Glenn
So
Ignazio,
I think that's the position.
Thank you, sir, as always. Good to have you on always on these topics. It's a quarter past the hour. There's a lot more coming up. Here's what we have planned on News Nation Now.